Hey everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop. This is my new wall hanging tool cabinet that I just finished building over in the Guild. It features plenty of space for all my hand planes on those sweet tills in there. Lots of little cubbies and little drawers there for all my small stuff. And most excitingly, it features a pair of doors which give me a lot of real estate to hang various tools in the doors, which is super awesome. It also features some pretty nice custom birch crotch veneer panels for the front. So let's get started. Before jumping into the build, I wanted to make sure I spent enough time working through the design. I started by measuring out the biggest the cabinet could be to fit on the wall where I wanted it to go, and then pulled out all my tools and started playing with the layout. I decided on a layout for the main case with a bank of drawers and cubbies along the bottom and a saw and plane tills as the main focal point of the main case. Next I could lay out the doors. Since I wanted to do 2 pairs of doors, I had 3 pairs of layouts to play with. At this point, I was mostly concerned with grouping tools together and taking a better visual inventory of things. I knew I wanted my most frequently used tools on the inside doors, and my secondary tools would live inside the door pairs. After a good amount of thought and planning, I came up with a design that I was really happy about and I could start building. For the case and doors, I decided to use a pair of elm boards. These came from a log I salvaged in Inver Grove Heights here in the Minneapolis area back in 2016. This was one of the logs that sat in my driveway while I was building my bandsaw mill and was one of the earlier logs that I cut. To spice things up, I decided to use a slice of birch crotch that I'll turn into veneer for the front panels. This tree came from my next door neighbor's yard. It was growing next to my shed, where his shed is now, and was also one of the logs that was sitting in my driveway while I was building my sawmill. With all the material selected, I could start laying out the parts. Because I have a pair of boards wide enough, I can lay out the main case and doors so I have a continuous grain between the case and inner door and a book match between the 2 doors. I'll also have enough stock left over to get the inner parts of the doors and a shelf and divider for the case. I'll break down the stock, keeping everything labeled, and then roughly mill the parts. Once they're cleaned up, I'll leave them to rest for a few days, and in that time I'll fill any defects with a tinted epoxy. A few days later, I'll run the boards through the milling machines again and start dimensioning the stock for the case and doors. I'll start the joiner by working on the main case. This will be joined with through dovetails, but the front edge will be mitered. I'll use the bandsaw to create the tails on the case sides, but I'll avoid making the cut towards the front edge, which will be where the miter will be. This miter will be done by hand. I'll clean up the waste from between the tails and start working on the mitered area. I'll use a handsaw to create the wall of the tail, sawing from the inside, and then cut the miter. To refine the mitered area, I'll use a guide block and a chisel to pare away the waste until the block is right on the scribe line along the base of the tails. Okay, that's the tail side miter. With the tail board all cut, I can transfer the tail locations onto the pin board and start cutting the pins. I'll scoop out the waste, chop back to the scribe line, and lastly pare the pins to final size. Before putting the joint together, the front pin is mitered and cleaned up. The same process is repeated for the other 3 corners, and that takes care of the case joinery. Next, I'll add a rabbet along the back edge of the case, which will receive the back panel. The rabbets on the top and bottom are stopped, so I'll finish those up with some chisels. Once the rabbets are out of the way, I'll start working on the horizontal divider. This divider will join into the case sides with a crenellated tenon to create more long grain to long grain glue surface, essentially creating a finger joint in the middle of the board. The shoulders are cut so they are the perfect distance apart to fit between the case sides, and then a tongue is formed to the thickness that the mortises will be. The crenellations are laid out and cut into the tongue. A shallow dado is cut into the case sides for the base of the tenons, and then the divider is set in place, and start and stop points of each tenon is transferred to the bottom of the dado. These start and stop points are further defined with a knife, and the router is brought back in to create the individual mortises. A little chisel work to square up the corners, and the dividers slide right in. Next, the vertical dividers can be added. They will slide in from the back in dados. The locations are found, and a spacer is used against the case side to guide the router to cut these dados. The divider stock is planed and sanded to thickness and then cut to fit from top to bottom. They will be lapped over the case bottom and horizontal divider, so those cuts are marked and the notches are cut. Next, I can move on to the cubby area, which is framed out by an L-shaped shelf. This shelf will join to the case side and horizontal divider with the same crenellated tenon joinery. Those tenons are formed first before I turn the stock into its L shape, which I'll do with a waterfall joint so the grain flows seamlessly over the corner. I'll cut a 45-degree bevel in each direction, making sure to remove only a kerf width worth of material. These cuts are pretty close off the saw, but I'll further refine them with a plane, using a straight edge to check my work. The joint is reinforced with a few dominoes, and some plywood clamping cauls are glued onto the parts. Some glue is added to the joint and the floating tenons, and clamps can be used to bring everything together. Once the glue sets, the cauls can be removed by splitting through the plies, and the remainder can be sanded away as the joint is cleaned up and flushed up. Now the mortises can be laid out and cut into the side and divider to receive the shelf. It's the same process here, using a spacer with the router to keep everything positioned correctly. A little chisel work to square things up, and the shelf is in. Next, I'll add the dados for the cubby dividers. These slide in from the back and are lapped over just like the vertical dividers in the bottom area. I'll use a router with a spacer to keep the spacing consistent. After a dado is cut, a filler is placed into the dado to serve as a reference for the next dado. I can step down the length, cutting all the dados, and then repeat the process on the underside of the shelf. I glued up some scrap for the cubbyhole divider stock, resawed it, planed, and sanded it to the correct thickness to fit into the dados. The stock is cut to fit between the dados, slid in from the back, lap locations marked, and the laps cut. That takes care of the joinery on the case. All the interior parts and surfaces can be finish prepped, and the glue up can begin. I used epoxy for this glue up so I can put the whole case together in one go. Once the epoxy cures, the clamps can be removed and the dovetails can be flushed up. Next, the back panel can be cut and installed. It's a two-piece back with the lower section acting as a French cleat. The upper section is screwed into the case. Next, I can move on to the doors. I'll separate the top and bottom into left and right parts and start on the joinery. I'll use a mitered through dovetail on the doors as well, but in this case I'll miter both the inside and outside edges since both will be visible in the finished piece. I'll make the inside tail cuts on the bandsaw and then clean things up back at the bench. Next, I can add the miters, so again sawing from the inside face, the wall of the tail can be formed. The bulk of the miter waste is sawn away, and the paring guide can be brought back to clean up the mitered area. Once the tailboard is all ready, it can be transferred to the pin board. The pins can be cut, the waste removed, the pins can be cleaned up, and lastly the miters can be cut on the outside pins. And it's the exact same process on the other three corners for this door and for each of the four corners on the other three doors. So that's 16 of these mitered through dovetail joints to join all the doors together. Now with all the door frames done, I can arrange them with the case and breathe a sigh of relief that I didn't mess something up and each side's continuous grain and book match is still correct. Now I'm going to start working on the custom plywood panels for the front doors. I'll rough cut the birch crotch and then make a mold for it. I didn't want to surface the crotch because there were a lot of small, delicate looking fibers that I wanted to preserve in the final encapsulation. I just didn't want to risk damaging those with cutting tools. The mold is sealed with a silicone, and once that is cured, the mold is filled with a casting resin tinted brown. This stuff takes several days to cure, so I poured this before I went to Texas to help April build her bandsaw mill. When I got back a week later, I could demold the slab. I gave it a few passes with my router sled to clean up the top face and flatten it so it'll be ready for the next step, which will be resawing. At a bit over 20 inches wide, this blank is too big for my indoor bandsaw, so I set up my sawmill to slice it into pieces of veneer. I wasn't too sure how well this would work, but I was relieved to find out that it worked just fine. Oh, that's... With a bit more confidence, I could reset things and make a second slice. That's cool. Can't believe this worked. Look at that. Look at that. Epoxy encapsulated slab veneer. I'm so excited about this. These veneers were cut to around 1/4 inch thick and then were run through the drum sander to remove the saw marks. The final thickness on the veneer was just a bit under 1/8 of an inch. Next, I can adhere them down to a substrate. I used epoxy as an adhesive and 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood as a substrate. The plywood and veneer went into a vacuum bag to clamp them together and were left under vacuum for about 18 hours while the epoxy cured. Are you stronger than me?
No.
You think you can do it? Ugh. Okay, grab that. Go walk that way and pull. There you go.
Wow, that's cool, Dad.
I thought so. Robot? That's Master Chief. What are you talking about, robot? Next, I needed some veneer for the back side of the panels to balance them out. I used another slice of the birch from the same log and broke it down and resawed it into strips of veneer. Each strip went through the drum sander to bring it to the same thickness as the crotch veneer. Then I could joint each seam in preparation for making these into sheets. I added some glue to the seams and used tape to hold the slices together. The sheet went into the vacuum bag to keep all the seams flush while the glue cured. Now these sheets can be veneered to the back side of the panels. Because it's going to be a lot easier to finish these panels before they're glued into the doors, I'll trim them down to rough size and bring them through the finishing process now. The crotch epoxy veneer is sanded up through the grits starting at 80 grit and finishing with 1000 grit to bring back the luster in the epoxy. The surface is cleaned and 3 coats of wiping varnish are applied, sanding between each coat with 1000 grit sandpaper. The back side is also finished with 3 coats of wiping varnish, but since this side is just wood, it's only sanded to 180 grit before finish. With the panel stock out of the way, I can turn back to the door frames and create the grooves that will receive the panels. The grooves on the sides are stopped, so those are finished up with some chisel work. Now the doors can be glued up. The inner doors have a piece of 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood installed into the grooves. This plywood will match the look for the stock I've used for the back of the cabinet. Again, I'm using epoxy, so I have all the time in the world to get the door assembled, and I'll use the case as a clamping form so I can ensure the doors have the same geometry as the case. I can use a clamp on the diagonal to rack the door until it matches. The outer doors are assembled in a similar way. I pre-finished the inside of the doors so I won't have to get near the panels with a finish applicator later on. I'll use the inner doors as a clamping frame this time, and again I'll rack the door until it matches and leave it to cure. And there's the case and the doors. Next I can start hanging the doors on the hinges. I'll lay out the extents of the hinge mortises and use a router to remove the bulk of the waste. Chisels are used to clean up the remaining waste. With a bit of care, the hinges will slide into their mortises with no slop. I decided to use precision butt hinges from important brasses on this build. I've used these hinges on numerous furniture projects in the past, and they've always worked out wonderfully. They're well made, have minimal slop, and don't break the bank. And most importantly, they're plenty strong to support the weight of the loaded doors. So once I have one set of mortises cut, I can transfer the mortise locations to the mating door, mark those ones out, and cut those ones as well. And I'll just repeat that process to work through all the mortises for all the hinges. And there's 8 pairs of hinges, so that's 32 individual mortises to cut. Once the mortises are cut, I'll install the hinges with the temporary steel screws that are included. These will compress the fibers in preparation for the softer brass screws, and they're easier to get in and out as the doors are hung and removed during the rest of the build. With the doors out of the way, next I can make the drawers. I'm starting with some spalted birch for the drawer fronts that I've had for a long time. It's beautiful, but it's pretty mushy, so before moving forward, I'll stabilize it with some penetrating epoxy. Once the epoxy cures, the drawer front stock is much firmer and can be milled to final size, and the individual drawer fronts can be cut and fit to each respective opening. Next, I'll need some stock for the drawer boxes. I grabbed a piece of ash that I cut on my friend Jim's homemade swing blade sawmill several years ago and broke it down into the stock for the drawer sides, backs, and bottoms. The drawer sides are joined to the front with half-blind dovetails. The tails are cut at the bandsaw, cleaned up, and transferred to the drawer front. I'll drill the bulk of the waste with a Forstner bit at the drill press and work back to the lines with chisels. Next I can add the drawer back, which is cut pins first. The pins are sawn and the waste is cleaned up. The back can be placed in the partially assembled drawer and the locations can be transferred. The tails can be sawn, the waste removed, and just like that, the drawer box is complete. The finger pull can be drilled into the drawer front and the drawer can be glued up. Next I can make the drawer bottom, which is just a panel beveled to fit into the grooves. The bottom is secured to the back with a screw and a slot. Now it's time to get the cabinet up onto the wall and do the final fitting of the doors, which means it's time for my old cabinet to come down. I'll mount the lower section of the back to the wall with lag bolts in shields. And with 2 bolts installed, I'll try the old try to rip it off the wall maneuver. Satisfied that the cleat isn't going to come off the wall, I'll throw the cabinet up onto the cleat and try to pull it off the wall by hanging from it. Lindsay helped me hang the doors. It's up there.
Looks good, dude.
The door.
Looks nice.
And then I can flush everything up and take it all back down again for finish. Finish on the rest of the project is the same as the panels. I use 3 coats of wiping varnish to provide a moderate amount of protection without going too far as to have a significant build. Once the finishing is done, the cabinet can be mounted back onto the wall, and I added a couple of bolts to the upper section of the case, which allow me to bring the cabinet into plumb so the doors wouldn't swing on their own. Now the last thing to do is to create tool holders for everything and load this bad boy up. The main focal point of the cabinet is a plane till, or rather tills. These are made from a couple of plywood panels, which are beveled on the top and bottom. Small strips of wood frame out the planes, and the tills are held in place with a pair of dowels. The saw till next door consists of a block that rests on the shelf and a block mounted to the back of the case with curves in it to hold the saw blades. The right doors are the domain of my chisels. The chisel racks are simply strips of wood with holes drilled and slots cut to hold the various chisels. The squares and bevels just sit on a small rabbeted shelf type thing, and in various places in the case I've sleeved a brass screw with a brass rod to create studs to hang various tools. So just a few other notable tool holders. In this door I have this strip with some slots in it, and that holds my marking gauges. And then on the inside of this door I have this shelf type thing which holds my rasps and files. Now over here on the right door I have this holder for my marking knives, and that just has some little slots milled into it to accept the blades of the knives. And lastly, probably my favorite holder is this guy right here for card scrapers. So this is a little pull-out tray that receives all the scrapers, holds them nicely, and organizes them so they're really easy to find, and they're not all rubbing up against each other in a big pile like they were in my old tool cabinet. And lastly, I installed some under cabinet lighting, which gives a little bit of glow on the underside here and illuminates the desk area a little bit. And then inside the case, I installed this light on sensors, which illuminate the planes a little bit and give it a little bit of sparkle. So I am super thrilled with the way this thing turned out. I think everything kind of came together really, really nicely. And this cabinet's going to be a lot more functional than my old cabinet was. Everything is really nice and organized and feels a lot neater, which makes the workshop itself a little bit more of an inspiring space. I really like the idea of having the double doors because it gives you so much more space to hang even more tools. And the way I've set things up as far as planning goes is the cabinet is maybe 2/3 to 3/4 full right now, so I have a good amount of capacity still to add things into the future. And lastly, these incredible epoxy encapsulated slab veneer panels. That was a really fun experience just to try something new to see if it would actually work. I hadn't done any kind of veneering before this, and that was a really cool process to dive into and try out. And the fact that these are crotch veneer definitely speak to my taste. So as I mentioned, this was just finished up over in the Guild. So if you want to check that out, there are 18 videos over there that I produced walking you through the entire process, going from design, layout, all the way through all of the joinery and construction of the entire case in plenty of detail. And there is also a full set of plans over there if you want to build something similar for your own shop. So I'll leave you a link to that down in the description if you want to check that out. So I think that's about it for this one. Thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about the hand tool cabinet or anything here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.